Hello, everyone, and welcome to APS webinars. The title of today's webinar is Entrepreneurship Using Physics. I'm Crystal Bailey, and I'll be your host for today's broadcast. Thank you all so much for joining us. APS webinars are brought to you as a service of the American Physical Society, connecting you with the expertise of individuals who can offer insight into physics careers, educational programs, and professional development for students, working physicists, and educators. Today's presentation features Jeff Bargiel. Jeff will be providing an overview of the entrepreneurial process, from developing new ideas, learning about marketability of new products, seeking funding and investment, and navigating many other notorious pitfalls that new companies face. After Jeff finishes the presentation, the remainder of the program will belong to you for our question and answer session. Because of the number of people attending this webinar, we are only accepting text questions. So if you would like to ask a question, please type it into the questions panel located on the right side of your screen. You may submit questions through the questions panel at any time during the webinar, and we will get to the speaker's response to those questions at the end. Finally, a link to the recording of today's presentation will be emailed to you after today's event and will be made available on the webinar homepage. Please allow 24 hours for video upload to the webinar homepage. We also encourage you to complete the survey upon exiting so that APS webinars can improve its ability to provide you with these valuable services. And so with that, let's get started. Jeff Bargiel is the founder and CEO of EntoBio, a 2.5-year-old startup developing a liquid product to naturally and quickly decompose tree stumps and other applications by copying termite digestive enzymes, or in other words, imitation termite spit. Jeff has 10 years of experience in business development at industrial biotech startups, developing, among other things, crop biostimulants from algae and biofuels from cassava. Prior to that, he was an optical engineer at a startup developing optical and microfluidic sensors and designing headlights in an automotive lighting company. Over his career, he has helped capture over $60 million in grants and non-dilutive funding for startups. He has a Bachelor of Science in Applied Physics from Kettering University and a Master of Science in Physics Entrepreneurship from Case Western Reserve University. All right, Jeff, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Crystal, for the introduction, and thanks to everyone for joining today. My goal today is to improve the success rate of businesses started by scientists. Today's main theme is don't fool yourself. Do you really have a good idea? And can we find a great one? You can expect to learn about how being a great scientist to set you up for entrepreneurship, tools for ideation, tools for evaluation, where to seek funding, and tips for improving your probability of success. And we'll start with you, the scientist. Hypothetically, scientists should make excellent entrepreneurs. We are exhaustingly curious, good at asking questions, generally comfortable with uncertainty, dogged in our pursuit of truth, generally gritty, and many of us are used to running our own labs and vying for funding, all things you'll probably have to do as an entrepreneur. Maybe we're not so good at all the times communicating clearly, humbly testing assumptions, spotting the blind spots, and sales. But I will say that one big advantage we have is that we already know how to use the scientific method. And the best entrepreneurs are constantly using the scientific method, even if they don't realize it. If you just do that, chances are you're already ahead of most folks when it comes to entrepreneurship. Before we get to testing, of course, you're going to need to come up with an idea. In this case, by an idea, we mean a problem solution set. It's not, in order to have a problem solution set, you're not really going to have a technology that doesn't solve anything, because that's not going to make a good business. Likewise with a problem that's still seeking a solution. You know, both sides of the equation. And even though you probably like me, I'm constantly bursting with ideas, right? But you probably need to come up with better ideas along the way. And so we have tools to come up with more and better ideas for businesses. Generally speaking, to generate ideas, we need to first prime that big gelatinous idea pump that we have between our ears. And that means breaking fixedness and being mindful and making connections. If you've never heard the term fixedness before, it is a fancy term for tunnel vision, or the syndrome that if you're a hammer, everything is nails. It means that you're kind of in your comfort zone. And the first thing we have to do if you're coming up with new ideas is breaking out of that comfort zone and starting to pay attention to other areas and other things happening around you, especially if they're outside your, like I said, your comfort zone. So once we can get you out of your comfort zone, you also need to be mindful of opportunities as they present themselves, when and where they present themselves. For example, being mindful to listen to every complaint. Every complaint is a possible problem that is seeking a solution. I do this a lot when I'm just walking around a Home Depot or a Lowe's or something like that, and you're just looking for white space and pointing out areas where people are complaining about this or that. And then finally, we also need to prime our brains to make connections, because we are trying to link together novel and interesting and potentially successful problem solution ideas. The worse the problem, the more it is begging for a solution and the better opportunity it's generally going to be. And there's lots of tools out there for ideation. This is just a smattering of some of them. And in fact, if you Google, well, ideation or brainstorming, you're going to come up with tons more ideas, tons more tools than this. Probably the most common ones you're familiar with are brainstorming and mind mapping. In my field, since we're doing termite biomimicry, the thought experiment that we do in biomimicry is, how does nature solve this? You can also do things like taking an idea and taking it to the extreme, or taking a problem to the absolute extreme and seeing if there's a solution out there and backing down from it. I also really like inside the box technique. This is actually a whole book, and you can Google this and find out more about it. Scientists also like this because they use kind of mathematical ways of coming up with ideas. For example, adding features, subtracting features, dividing and multiplying features that forces you out of your comfort zone and to find unique solutions. Okay, now so that you've got lots of ideas, the next things we have to do is figure out which ones are going to be worthy of your obsession and which ones should be killed. Our objective here should be to do this as quickly and as efficiently as possible, because you don't want to spend any more resources than is necessary on an idea that's probably going to fail in the long run. And in my opinion, this is the most important slide of the presentation and is today's theme. And I think it's a theme that should be ever present in many areas of our life, but especially in the early days of starting a business, and especially for scientists that are trying to become entrepreneurs. We are particularly primed for fooling ourselves, because especially when you're an entrepreneur, you want to really, really believe in your idea and that it's going to succeed. And so you have to turn a blind eye to areas that'll end up coming back and destroying it in the end. So we tend to be very primed to fool ourselves. I have certainly fooled myself plenty of times, and I've learned those lessons. And generally speaking, it's better to discover it now than after 3 years of development. Our goal, as I mentioned earlier in Valuation, is to kill ideas as quickly as possible. One way you can do it is by seeking in and zeroing on their fatal flaw. At the highest level, there are two overarching questions when it comes to evaluation. One is, can we do it? Of course, as the scientists know, that's the one that we really like to work on. And it's a lot of fun, and it's the one we really like to zero in on. But most businesses fail because of the other one. Should we do it? It's a very, very important question, and one that has a lot of sub-questions, a lot of hidden areas that can trip up and cause a business to fail. Many businesses started working on a product or idea they probably should not even started on in the first place. And many entrepreneurs, and especially scientists, sometimes grossly underappreciate this side. So the good news is that a lot of other people have failed in the past, and a lot of folks have analyzed why companies fail, and so that we've started to develop a lot of tools to stop entrepreneurs from falling into some of the most common traps. Our first and most important tool is something that most of you recognize. It's the scientific method. And what we really want to do here is bring your science training to test commercialization assumptions. While technical hypotheses can be tested in the lab, commercialization questions must be tested in the market. And that means more often than not, talking to customers. As a very strong recommendation, you should be doing it now, you should be doing it often, or they'll end up just killing you later. There's a few famous quotes you've probably heard in the past. In God we trust, all others must bring data. And without data, you're just another person with an opinion. I have talked to folks that have worked on the Google X team, working on the most extreme ideas. And I'll tell you that this is also one of the things that they evangelize very, very strongly within Google. You gotta hypothesize, you gotta test it. And instead of people sitting around in a conference room arguing about the best way to step forward, the thing you should really be doing is backing off and saying, how can we most quickly and efficiently test something so that we can adjust and reevaluate. So what should we test and how should we test? There are a lot of things to think about, and there are lots of excellent tools to help organize and reveal blind spots to increase your probability of success. I'll touch on the three here: the value proposition canvas, business model canvas, and baseboard. And there's also one called the lean canvas, which I'll leave for you to go explore more on your own. The first thing I just want to put out is that business plan is scratched out here. That's because most companies today do not need to do a true business plan in the classical sense. They take a lot of work. They're full of a lot of assumptions. Most people never want to see them. And just like any plan, it will not survive first contact with the market. So it is much more efficient to start with the value proposition canvas and then move on to a business model canvas or a baseboard, and I'll explain those a little bit, than to spend time writing a business plan. If we're first going to look at a value proposition canvas, the first thing we need to do is to define what is a value proposition. This is absolutely core and probably the first thing you should do after you come up with your problem solution set, is because your solution needs to promise a value, needs to deliver a value to the market, to your customer. And that is a benefit. It is something that is not necessarily a feature. Generally speaking, you should be able to take this and boil it down to a very, very clear statement that is just one or two sentences. For example, my company is developing this imitation termite spit that we are expecting to be able to cut the time in half that would take to decompose a tree stump. It's conveying a unique differentiator, and it's quantified, and it's certainly relevant to somebody that's doing a DIY type application or trying to remove tree stumps. It's the first tool that we need going forward. If you need help figuring out your value proposition, you can use a value proposition canvas. Briefly speaking, this canvas is going to connect our product's features, its gain creators, and its pain relievers to the customer's jobs to be done, the pains they have, and the gains they seek. If you have filled this out fully, each gain creator will connect to a gain, and each pain reliever will connect to a pain. You'll probably have several, so you may also want to take the next step and actually prioritize which one of these are going to be the most important. There's also a lot of information out on the internet, a lot of videos that specifically address how to use a value proposition canvas. You'll notice that a lot of your ideas fall into one of two categories, either a technology push or a market pull. A technology push is a technology that is seeking, is a technology or solution that is seeking a problem. A market pull is the opposite. It is a problem that is seeking a solution. I think most entrepreneurs will agree that it is usually harder for a technology to find a problem that it can solve well enough to get someone to buy it. The reason is because you have a technology, and if you're trying to find a solution that it solves, most problems already have a solution. They already have a way of solving that problem. So it's an uphill battle to demonstrate that your technology can solve it better than anyone else. On the flip side, it is usually easier for someone with an active problem to adopt a solution that is that solves their problem, even if it's just a little bit. This is because if the solution had already existed, then they wouldn't have a problem. So people are generally primed to want to solve their problems, which is why a market pull is usually a better position overall. But eventually you are going to have to very strongly connect the value, the technology side, your product and service with customers' pains and gains. Once you have your value proposition written out completely, the next thing you have to move on to is the business model canvas. And you'll see right in the middle there is the value proposition because it's central. But the business model canvas starts filling in the rest of your plan, and it prompts with a lot of questions. For example, who are your key partners? Who are your key suppliers? What are going to be the key activities to deliver your value proposition? What are going to be your distribution channels? What sort of revenue streams are going to have? What sort of customer relationships are you going to need to have? What sort of key resources are each one of your customer relationships going to need? How are all the customer segments broken out? And are we creating value for each one of those customer segments? What's the customer archetype for all of your segments? But through which sort of channels are you going to reach your customers? Are there other stakeholders in the customers, for example, purchasers, secretaries, I already mentioned, well, purchasers, buyers, the end users. Are there also going to be decision makers? Is there somebody in the executive chain that's going to have to sign off? All these are very, very critical. And then at the bottom, you have things like your costs and revenue, because I'll tell you that generally speaking, you want your business to make money, and which means that I'm really hoping that you figure out early on that your revenue is going to be much higher than your cost. To use a business model canvas, generally speaking, you're going to fill in a bunch of your assumptions in each one of these categories with a Post-it note, or if you're doing it digitally. Fill all of these assumptions. They don't have to be really drastic, especially early on, just general ideas. But you're going to have lots of information in here, and it's going to be all stored and organized neatly. The next thing you're going to do is apply your scientific method, and you're going to go out and test each one of these assumptions. And you're going to have to use a little bit of common sense to zero in on which one of these are going to be the most critical and have the most potential to fatally kill your business idea. Generally, it's more efficient to kill an idea, again, early on. And if you're interested in learning more about this, Steve Blank has a free course on Udacity, specifically talking about the business model canvas. If you want to go into a little bit more detail, there's another canvas called the Business Approach and Structure Elements Board, also known as a base board. There's a lot more detail here. This method is also more organized and more linear. If you just like that, maybe after you've done a business model canvas, you can take this up into the next level of detail. As a reminder, please talk to customers and the stakeholders, decision makers, purchasers, executives, et cetera. As an aside here, a few years ago, the National Science Foundation realized that they were having a problem pushing their science, especially for some of the grants that were specifically targeted at small businesses. And so they started coming up with ideas for how they could help scientists have higher success rates and better commercialization. They developed something called the Innovation Core, I-Core program. If you are an early level scientist and you think you have an idea that might play well into the market, there are grants available through the I-Core program. I think they're somewhere in the magnitude of $25,000 or $50,000 that are specifically geared towards helping you through the customer discovery process. You should want to validate the market yourself anyhow, but investors will most certainly want you to do this. And you can go through the different increasing levels of validity. For example, you can start with just, of course, talking to customers, but the next level what you'd want to do is back up their statements and with letters, commitments. If you can get your customer to invest in you, that's a pretty high mark. And ultimately a purchase. If you can get them to sign a purchase order or an agreement, that is the highest level of validation. Generally, you'll hear the phrase often that sales can cure all, and investors are willing to look past a lot if you can get some sales under your belt. If we dig a little bit more into evaluation, there's a few things that aren't necessarily on the business model canvas that are just sort of good ideas for small businesses or startups to be working on. The first one is that you'll see most of your ideas fall into one of two categories, that you're either trying to help customers seek pleasure or go away from pain. I'll tell you from experience that both of them can work, obviously, or else we wouldn't have a Disney World. But most folks are more interested in getting rid of pain. So you're going to have a little bit of an easier time if that's what your idea does. The exception to that is in software, where businesses are usually more inclined to pay for software that increases revenue rather than saving cost. Another bit of advice in evaluation is that you're going to want something that is a big problem, very acute, and has a big market, but can you start selling small and fast, or start developing small and fast? The reason why is because time is oxygen, and there's a big question here: is can you hold your breath while it takes Ford 3 years to implement your solution? Or if you need $500 million to go build a fusion reactor, guess what? Enterprise, big capital, big infrastructure solutions usually take way too long, and you will die on the vine waiting to deliver these things to the market. So most investors will look for something that's much more rapid, and they will leave the big enterprise stuff for the big enterprise companies to solve that have very large pockets and can afford to survive for a long time. Two resources, if you're interested more in this, is a blog post by Guy Turner from Hyde Park Ventures called The Wave Theory of Startups. And Peter Thiel's 0 to 1 has a excellent chapter on why startups should not really be working on biofuels. Okay. An important concept in this can you start small and fast is minimum viable product. The definition is that this is a minimum product that delivers customer value. Okay. What does this mean? This is something that means that you can prove the market, then improve the product. So, for example, one approach to product development is let's say that you want this beautiful sedan on stage number 4 up here. You could start by perfectly designing a wheel, a chassis, the cab, and then putting it all together in a big car. That's great unless the car that you deliver is not the thing that the customer wanted. Another approach could be, we'll build some version of it can go forward. Eventually we'll add a motor and we'll get to a full car. That's a little bit better approach. But the best approach is actually to see if you can build something that the customer sees all or most of the value, and then once that is tested, you can go on with adding features and eventually meet your final goal. In this little analogy here, the guy that's driving the car is your customer, and he's not looking behind him. He's not seeing that you are pushing. A good example of this is also in some software development. The user, the customer, only sees the front end. They only see the user experience that you're showing them. Well, if you are still doing everything manually behind the scenes, that's okay. That's a minimum viable product. The point is that you got a customer to pay for the value that you're planning to deliver. All of the automation and development of the software that's going to run it in the background is actually a feature of the product that can come later. The point of a minimum viable product is to prove the customer value. Prove that there is a market that somebody is going to buy it. Okay, congratulations. You have an idea and a plan that is thoroughly vetted by the market. You have a rockstar team, a profit model, and a go-to-market plan. You think that your product can very quickly start going to market, and there's not a whole lot of technical development or market development left to be done. Now, you have to find funding. I would recommend that you start with yourself. Most investors and other folks will take you more seriously if you put some skin in the game. After that, there is the SBIR STTR program. These are federal programs. They stand for Small Business Innovation and Research, or Small Business Technology Transfer and research. They are sister programs. SBIR means that as your company can take all the money itself. STTR means that you need to have a nonprofit partner that has a significant piece of the funding. It's usually university. Every federal agency is required to set aside a portion of their budget for the SBIR STTR program. So that means you can go to the Department of Education, Department of Justice, the Department of Defense, Energy, National Science Foundation, EPA, Interior, NIST, on and on, NASA. And each one of these agencies, however, is given freedom for how they administer the program. So you'll have to check in individually with each agency to see when their deadlines are, what their process is, what the amount of funding. Generally, it's a phase 1, phase 2 type program. But I have had a lot of success with STTRs and SBIRs in the past, and I think they're excellent because they're trying to bridge the gap between your idea and getting enough technical validation for investors or later customers to pick up the slack. The next step is, generally speaking, you're going to go to, and I say this a little bit tongue-in-cheek, friends, family, and fools, also known as the 3 Fs. It's a good idea, but be careful, of course. Friends and family, you just need to make sure that you're going to be good business partners as well, and they understand that startup investing is extremely risky. Another good place to look is locally around you for pitch competitions. So these are generally put on by economic development groups and investor groups, and there's usually some sort of cash prize associated with, sometimes in-kind services, but it's a good place to look if you need a little bit of cash to get things started. Also, your local county and state is probably doing some sort of economic development. And I know that I'm located in Ohio, and we are fortunate in that we invest a lot in economic development of technology businesses that have a lot of promise for bringing jobs to the state. Angels and venture capitalists. So now we're talking about actual investors. These are folks that want to take a portion of your company. Generally speaking, an angel is just a wealthy person. They're available to find, but there's a lot of technique that goes into trying to find them. They're generally speaking wealthy individuals. Sometimes they go around in groups so that they can pool their resources and lower their own risk. And finally, something that folks forget about are actually their customers. Sometimes you have a customer that's just that your product will also benefit them. Or you have a customer that someday may want to acquire you. So, get creative with customers. You can do things like asking if they prepay for certain orders or become an actual investor in your company overall. But don't forget about them. While you're out seeking funding, it's very important to remember that selling is the CEO's #1 job, and you're going to have to do a lot of pitching, and pitching is selling. And a big reminder that whether or not you are given, even if you're given a half hour to give your pitch, generally speaking, you got about 20 seconds to capture the audience's attention and keep, or else they're going to be lost. So it's extremely important that you craft that first 20 seconds. It's something that needs to be really compelling. It needs a hook. It's probably not going to center on the technology. It's going to center more around the amazing benefit that you have to this big, hairy problem. You're going to want to use common language. It's something that I struggled with early on and I tested a lot of different ways of pitching my 20 seconds to get people to go, oh, wow, that's interesting. I want to learn more. And you'll need to practice because this is something that should really roll off the tongue. If you are stepping up into, there's your 20 seconds, there is your 2-minute version of the pitch, your 5-minute, and probably your 10-minute. If going past 10 minutes, it's going to be fairly rare that you're going to be given an opportunity to pitch past 10 minutes, but always at 20 seconds. More important than what your name is, you're just going to come right out of the gate on your title slide in your pitch deck and really nail that 20 seconds. Oh, by the way, if your product was invented by a Nobel laureate, that's a good thing to slip into your 20 seconds. Okay. All right. Now you're kind of moving along, and you're starting to make a little progress. Where should you be spending your time? Generally speaking, you should be try to be focusing on achievements that resolve major uncertainties. The market does not like uncertainties. A lot of people say that entrepreneurs are risk takers. We're not. Well, maybe initially we are, but we are risk minimizers. We want to constantly and voraciously be removing uncertainty bit by bit. And the definition of a major inflection point is a major reduction in uncertainty. And it's also something that moves you closer to the market and causes a major jump in valuation. Whenever you raise money, it should be to get you to and past a major milestone so that you reduce uncertainty, and you increase the valuation of your company overall. And then you can go raise the next end. And again, as I said earlier, sales cures all. I mean, it's the ultimate risk reducer. A few bits of advice and pitfalls going forward, and this is by no means comprehensive. There's a lot of stuff out there, of course, and you can get a lot of advice from different folks. But startups are not small versions of big companies. If you worked in a big company, if you worked in a big university, this is something that's really important to remember. You don't need the big copy machine. It's not a small version of a big company. It is a small company, and it needs to operate like a small company. And you need to be zeroing in on inflection points. Also, products are not businesses. That's the whole point of completing a business model canvas, is that you have completed almost completed the picture of what it is you're going to have to do to have a full business. Many companies also fail because their solution is good. It's better, but it's not good enough to get a lot of people to switch. So you should be trying to find a solution that is 10 times better, whatever that means in your particular context. Patents. I talk to a lot of entrepreneurs that clam up as soon as you ask them about their idea, and they say, well, we need to sign an NDA. Well, good luck with that. Most investors will not even give you the time of day if that's your response. You know why? It's because most people are too busy to care about stealing your idea. But with that being said, don't disclose it publicly. Don't talk about your wonderful idea out in a conference if you have not yet at least filed a provisional patent. I also recommend getting a patent attorney to write this because it is legal language. It's not technical language, and they'll know what they're writing to protect you in the future. Starting too late. I had a problem with this. I wanted everything to be perfect, and I had to remind myself that I should not let the perfect be the enemy of the good. This goes back to the minimum viable product concept. Reid Hoffman, the founder of LinkedIn, is famous for saying an entrepreneur is someone who will jump off a cliff and assemble an airplane on the way down. That's very true. I think Bill Gates also said something along the lines of, if you know everything about your business in order to start, you're actually too late. A few last pieces of advice that I have found useful. Be humble, but you're going to need to be decisive. Be coachable. That helps a lot. You don't know everything, and it's very helpful if you are receptive to others' advice. And along with that, you should try to find mentors especially mentors that have had success, and especially if they are in your particular space before. Generally speaking, to find a mentor, you're not going to just go out there and start randomly cold calling people and saying, will you be my mentor? No, generally speaking, you're going to find them, if you can, get an introduction from someone. But if you can't, approach them and just saying, hey, I'm trying to do something that's kind of in your space. I know you're an expert. Could you just spend a few minutes with me to get a little bit of advice from you? And usually folks are willing to say yes. After that, then you move on to, it'll naturally become a mentor relationship, maybe even an investor relationship. Also, don't ask for crazy valuations. It's the market. It's realistic. If you go to 100 investors and they're all telling you no because you're asking for $100 million for your idea that's still on paper, it's not going to happen. So just be realistic about valuations. I'm not pretending that I'm perfect. I certainly struggled along the way, and here's just a few of the things that I struggled with, and a lot of scientists that I've worked with along the way have also struggled with these. I suffer from analysis paralysis. I always have, probably always will. So eventually I just got to get over that hump and just make a decision. It's better to move on. This is where mentors can help a lot, because sometimes they can help you break that paralysis. Clear, concrete, down-to-earth communications. There's a book called Everybody Writes by Ann Handley. She did a really good job of explaining to me how I can make my language and speaking a little bit easier to grasp by the general public and investors. I also have the ooh shiny syndrome. Hey, look at that neat new idea over there. Maybe I should be chasing that, and no, remind myself I need to come back to my core idea and working on those major inflection points. I also have a lot of anxiety, admittedly, about cold calling new people, but you do it enough times and eventually the anxiety goes away. And along with the ooh shiny syndrome also comes with learning how to ignore the unimportant. Sometimes our brains want to go to the easiest thing to solve, and the easiest thing to solve is oftentimes not the most important thing. So just reminding folks that the most important things, again, are trying to get you to those inflection points, major milestones that help move you closer to the market. So with that, I'll say, again, reminding you, don't fool yourself. Listen to Richard Feynman, that you're the easiest one to fool. I hope I've provided enough tools here to help you get along your evaluating your idea and see if we can't get some new great ideas out into the market and more science entrepreneurs. With that, there's a lot of resources provided here, other places to look, lots of great advice out there to help you get started. So with that, I'll say thank you, and I look forward to answering any of your questions.
All right, great. Well, thank you so much, Jeff. And while I'm here, while we're on this slide, I do just want to give a little plug for the very first thing that's there. The Pipeline program is a NSF funded program that APS is heading up. And basically what we're trying to do is bring innovation and entrepreneurship education into undergraduate physics classrooms. And who knows, also graduate classrooms, because I think that's super important. So if you want to find out more information about Pipeline, and we also have a PI newsletter, Physics, Innovation, and Entrepreneurship, or quote PI. If you want to just get a monthly email that has cool information about innovation and entrepreneurship related stuff, join the newsletter. It's once a month. You can look at it or not, but we always put something in there that is relevant and sort of the same types of things that Jeff has been talking about today. So please sign up for that if you want that. Okay, well, we got some really good questions coming in. Oh, good questions. They're flooding in now. So I think I want to start off with something that really struck me, and this is another person wrote in with a very similar idea. Getting back to what you said before about, it's usually the problems that don't have a solution rather than the solutions that don't have a problem, that those are a little bit less successful. But when I always imagined being a graduate student, you're in physics, you're coming up with these really cool processes, you're improving on things, maybe you've developed this technology that has a particular use in a scientific context, but could be used for something else. Those always seem like technologies without, solutions without problems. And so, which, is less ideal. So if you were a graduate student who, is always coming up with ideas that you think are a good idea, but it already exists, or you haven't identified an actual problem in the world, what would be your advice for someone in that position?
Well, I guess if you are working on something, you probably pitched some thing that it could solve or improve. If you're improving on something that already existed, maybe that thing that it was doing before was already trying to solve something. You're just trying to solve it better. So I guess you can. I mean, that's always the easiest place to start. It is a really tough question though, because that is the paradox. I would probably recommend starting to just talk to customers at least in some field that you think this could work in, and it'll probably snowball from there. My experience is that the first customer that I talked to, I've had occasions where I pivoted immediately because they said, oh no, that's not my problem. This is my problem. And so it goes back to that talking to customers and talking to as many people as possible. Chances are something will pop out that it'll help with, that they'll be able to have some sort of problem you might be applicable to. It is tough, and that's why most folks find that a technology push is harder for that very paradox reason. So I guess my best advice is just to talk to people, as many people as possible.
Okay, great. Okay, so another question. You said, have reasonable valuation. So can you define that a little bit more clearly? Like what kind of guidelines? What defines reasonable?
So first of all, valuation is what the value of your company would be right now prior to investment. So if we're going to price shares of your company they're going to sell, that would be your valuation. Reasonable valuations, it's in the really earliest stages, it is an art more than a science, and even later on, it's going to be that it's still kind of an art more than a science. A reasonable valuation has so much to do with the technology and the problem, and but the most important metric is going to be how close you are to the market. How soon can you get to sales, and how much risk is left? How many more milestones are left before you can start sales? There are a few places out on the internet that will talk about early stage valuations. I think a lot of incubators and early investors have kind of settled on a model where they're giving you, let's say, 25,000 to 50,000 for like 4 to 6% of your company. That's just because they're throwing money at a wall and they really have no idea which one of their investments are going to succeed, and it's worth starting there and helping you along. After that, it becomes harder and harder. Also, investors will use different types of investment instruments to try to ignore this question for a little while. They'll use an instrument called convertible debt, meaning that their investment in you is they're giving you the money and it is debt. It's going to collect interest and it could potentially be paid back in cash, but if a certain event happens, then it'll convert to equity. And that event is usually that you are seeking a larger investment round, and that larger investment round, they are the ones that are placing a valuation on your company. So that's one instrument. There's also another instrument called a SAFE, which is a simple agreement for future equity. Kind of does the same thing. It's kicking the valuation question down the road. Those seed rounds, generally speaking, there can be anywhere from, let's say, 100,000 all the way up to a few $1 million, where they're still not putting a valuation on your company. But the simplest answer is your valuation is what the market will pay you for. Talk to lots of investors and see what kind of valuations they're putting on your company, and that'll be your answer.
Okay. Okay. Great. All right. So I have one very quick question. With the SBR STTR funding, would that be available to non-U.S. citizens? Or do you know?
To non-U.S. citizens, I do not know off the top of my head if non-U.S. citizens, but I will tell you that all of the work must be done domestically in the U.S. There are very, very, very few exceptions where any of the work can be done anywhere else in the world. The company must be based in the U.S. All work, even by subcontractors and vendors, must be done in the United States.
Okay.
Generally speaking.
Okay. All right. All right. So I have a question from a student with the Society of Physics Students. Can you say a little bit more about how the biomimicry came into your experience, like the term biomimicry? How did you start going down that path of imitation termites fit?
So I actually met through my network a fellow that had finished his PhD in termite guts, termite digestion, and we just started talking about his stuff. And I said, this is absolutely fascinating. And I think you're hitting on one of the biggest problems today with producing biofuels from non-food sources. I'm not going to try to get too technical into that, but trying to produce biofuels from grasses and wood is a lot harder than trying to produce biofuels from corn and sugar. So we wrapped a company around that, and that was the nexus for EntoBio. And then remember how I told you in one of the slides that big enterprise problems are really not the domain of startups? Yeah, I learned that lesson the hard way. That was about the time that Peter Thiel wrote his book, 0 to 1, and all of my mentors and advisors in that book hit me over the head and said, we can't be focusing on biofuels as startup. No investors were willing to talk to me. They had all been burned. And so I was looking for a much smaller solution and started to prime my brain with all of these ideation thought experiments. And I started thinking, if I could bottle a termite, what could I do with it? What could I do with it? And I was mowing my lawn one day thinking about this and hit this tree stump in my yard, and the light bulb went off. So if you think about how does nature solve a stump in the yard? They use termites and fungus to decompose it.
Oh, very good. Cool. So you kind of you had a sort of a technology in mind, but you were waiting to stumble literally across the problem.
Yes, in this sense, I had a technology push. I violated my own advice there.
Yeah, that's fine. But I mean, it's got to happen. Like I said, as scientists, you're coming up with new ideas and new processes and improving stuff all the time. So to me, that seems very natural. For a scientist, you're developing the technology, and you want to find a problem. So that makes sense. Okay. Let's see. Oh, here's a good question. How would you form a value proposition around bringing awareness to a problem that's not widely known? And the asker, excuse me, gave the example of like increasing literacy around quantum mechanics. I mean, you may think that is a useful thing within physics, and it is, but is there any way that you can translate that to being meaningful to a larger market?
That's a very specific question. I'm pretty sure we could probably use the value proposition canvas to attack that. I might reframe a little bit more, asking sort of what's the customer's pain there, and it's a little bit of a stumper, but I mean, you could say that the customer pain there is that maybe they don't know enough about quantum mechanics, and of course, one of the pains is that it is very difficult to learn, but one of the gains that they're seeking is maybe a job that uses quantum mechanics or trying to solve some sort of other problem. And then on the technology, or on the value map side, what product or service are you going to use to deliver that? And is it relieving the pain of learning quantum mechanics? Is it making it easier? And is it delivering the gain? So I think that it's a tough one, because we're not really talking too much about a problem solution set, because we haven't really identified the solution for doing that yet. But if you think about all the ways that you're going to try to educate people on quantum mechanics or some other difficult topic, you can certainly go back to the value proposition canvas and start filling it in and making sure that your delivery method, your education method, is in fact connected to the biggest pain points when it comes to learning such a difficult subject.
Okay. All right. So one question: do you have to be in Silicon Valley to attract VCs?
No.
No.
No. I live in Cleveland, Ohio, which you would think that the Rust Belt was as far as you could be from Silicon Valley. Categorically, no. You can find money, I think, just about anywhere. There is a book that I didn't put down on the resources. I'm trying to remember the name of it. I think it's called VC for the Rest of Us or something like that. Investment for the Rest of Us or something like that. I'd have to look it up, but you know, they talk about, he has interviewed a few folks that have raised money, especially in the Rust Belt, Midwest type areas. But no, you can find money anywhere. Big money is a little bit of a different question. But early on, you can usually find an angel group or an economic development group that will help you with that, or find mentors that will help connect you to angels. Big, like I said, big VC, let's say Series A, B, and C, many millions of dollars. You're probably going to have to gravitate at least towards a major metropolitan area to find that. But also good news is that technology is lowering the barriers for Silicon Valley investors to invest outside Silicon Valley now. So it's getting easier and easier for them. And a lot of them are starting to centralize around different areas, different technology sectors. And so they're more willing to geographically spread out. A lot of Silicon Valley folks are also starting to realize that it can be a lot cheaper to do development outside of Silicon Valley. And so they are willing to invest outside because the valuations are sweeter for them, and they can make their dollar go a lot further than they can in really expensive areas like Silicon Valley. So it's out there.
Okay. Okay, so we've got a couple questions now. Asking if you could, you know, a lot of the talk was very great, but it was kind of abstract. And so people are wanting to know, can you give examples of milestones that, like, when you say milestones, what do you mean, specifically thinking about companies that you founded in your experience? Like what types of things constitute milestones?
Okay, well, early on, your biggest one is, your biggest ones are probably going to be technical. And what we mean there is that your minimum viable product is delivering the value, that you show that you can do what you say you can do. So in my case, I claim that my product can help accelerate the decomposition of tree stumps. Do I have that technical proof? And there may be sub milestones along the way. For example, you know, doing expression or getting production of your product down. Okay, now you have the product. Now you can go test with the product in different conditions. Okay, now you have a lab proof. Okay, now moving on to proof in more of a real world setting. Those are all milestones, technical milestones to get you along the way. I didn't talk about here, but there's a tool that NASA and the Department of Defense and Energy use called technology readiness levels. And you can go read about those. Not every investor is going to know what those mean, but they're at least the framework that you can think through when it's coming to technical milestones. On market milestones, you're talking here about ticking the boxes with things in your business model canvas, validation, especially market validation. So, okay, you've proven that your product will work in a lab. Let's say you say that you've proven it working out in a real world setting. Well, now you need to hand it over to a customer, and you need to get at least getting one person to buy it, to purchase it, to pay for it. That would be a major milestone, because then the next step after getting that first person to pay for it will be getting the second person and the 100th person, and et cetera, et cetera. So those are all really major inflection points that reduce uncertainty. The biggest uncertainty is, will somebody buy your stuff? And you can prove that by getting somebody to buy it. Does that help?
Yeah, and again, just trying to imagine what that might look like, the thing that you're selling the first person. I mean, would it would it look a little rougher around the edges, or is it, yeah, I loved your picture of like the car that people are kind of pushing. I guess it would be very important though, even if it is customer one, that customer one feels like they're getting, a functioning, or, they get the thing that they expect, or something that's a real product, right?
I'll use an example of a vending machine. Okay. A customer is a person sitting out on the sidewalk. They put their money in, and the value they're expecting to get back is, a candy bar. Okay. Mm-hmm. If the machine delivers the candy bar, and then they're the first person that puts their money in and gets the candy bar, and then somebody else does it over and over and over again, you have proven that this concept works, that people are willing to pay you money to get the candy bar out of the vending machine. What they don't see, that you might still be physically inside the vending machine, taking the money and picking the candy bar and putting it in the slot. Okay, your customer doesn't
right.
need to see that.
Right.
The point is that you have proved.
Yeah.
As far as they're concerned, they put their money and they get your thing out. Another example of that would be minimum viable product would be my vending machine produces one candy bar, and that's it. But that might not be enough for some people. They might want different types of candy bars. They might also want potato chips, and maybe they also want it to do other things down the line. Those are all features that can be added later. Maybe somebody wants to pay with Bitcoin or credit card, something like that. Those are all features that can be added later, but you've already at least proven the base product market fit, the base problem solution set.
Right, which is people want to be able to buy stuff here with money and not have to go into a store or whatever. Yeah, right.
Yes.
Okay, cool. Well, folks, so we're just a couple minutes before the end. So this is the end of the time for the, quote, official webinar, but our speaker has graciously agreed to stick around, actually, and continue the discussion and answer a few more questions. We do have a couple really good ones that I'd like to put to you, Jeff. But before we do that, I do have to kind of officially sign off. So yeah, if you have schedules that permit, please stay around for a short period of time to continue the discussion. If you have to leave and we didn't get to your question, we're sorry about that. You can follow up by sending an email to webinars@aps.org. Also, just to reiterate, the recording of this video and slides of the presentation will be made available on the webinar homepage. And you'll get an email from the GoToWebinar system with a link to the video. It'll take us about 24 hours for that to upload and for you to receive the email. And lastly, if you are signing off right now, in order to help us continue to develop quality webinar presentations, please take a moment to complete a very short survey as you exit the webinar.